Derby County find themselves in a terrible predicament at the bottom of the Championship. They now find themselves 4 points from safety, having played a game more than those teams around them. Will Derby County be able to bounce back and secure themselves a place in the Sky Bet Championship? That is a big question on the lips of Derby County fans. But the question which I want to answer today is who is mainly at fault for the current predicament Derby County find themselves in. Now, a lot of people will probably know that I've put a tweet out over on Twitter, and as of the time of recording, it's a very, very decent split of who could be at fault for the current situation. And the people who I've put at fault, you'll see the tweet on screen right now, is David Clowes, Stephen Pearce and Paul Warne. And the current percentages are 20% David Clowes, 43% Stephen Pearce and 36% Paul Warne. You'll have that screenshot up on screen right now. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how this ends in the next 10 hours after recording this. It'll probably be about 5 or 6 hours when you're watching this, so make sure you do head on over to Twitter to go and see the poll that we have going on over there, because it's very interesting to see some of the responses that we've got within this tweet in itself. There's a lot of people blaming Stephen Pearce, a lot of people blaming Paul Warne. There's a few people who are putting the fault at the hands of David Clowes, and in my opinion, I think there is a massive talking point here. For as much as David Clowes is a reluctant owner, you have to be able to put some blame and some criticism at the owner right now. Now, completely understand that he took over the club in our worst possible circumstance and has gone on to get us promoted, but ultimately he is going to be the reason we get relegated. And yes, you've then got the likes of Stephen Pearce and Paul Warne, who each hold a part of blame within this circumstance. But for me personally, and this is where we're going to get into my thoughts and opinions, is that I believe that David Clowes has to hold the cards. And I believe that David Clowes is the person we should be discussing right now, because David Clowes is the person who runs overseas, controls budgets, and realistically it's been a nightmare this season. Started off really well, and I think that mainly falls down to the fact of we have a fully fit squad, and we do have enough quality within the squad. We came in confident after promotion. We had a fully fit squad and some really, really good players, and ultimately it's just gone downhill. It's gone very, very downhill. And for me, at some point that falls on David Clowes, because David Clowes has budgeted for this squad. He made the decision to keep hold of Stephen Pearce, who a lot of people have huge problems with at the moment. And he also made the decision to keep Paul Warne for a large majority of this season. Now, a lot of people are going to go, well, realistically, I think it was Boxing Day. I think we were sitting in about 18th place. We're about 8 points clear of 22nd, I think, is the first relegation place. But ultimately, that obviously hasn't continued. We've completely flipped places with the Portsmouths, with the Oxfords. There was other teams below us as well who we've completely switched with. And we've just absolutely, capitulated. And that, for me, not only does it fall on Paul Warne for not getting the most out of the group and not being able to rebuild throughout those injuries and things like that, and maybe give youngsters some opportunities, but it also falls on that of David Clowes for not giving. Realistically, I think we did a decent job in the summer, but I think it was very clear that we were still missing some key elements. I think we replaced what left the club, but I don't think we brought in enough quality to compete. If we'd have kept the starting 11 that we started the season with fit, the likes of Kane Wilson, Ryan Niambi, David Ozo, Kenzo Haldmine, you look at obviously Jerry Yates being the starting striker. If we'd have kept it fit and played a proper style of football for the likes of Jerry Yates, the likes of Mendes Lang, the likes of Caden Jackson, I think we'd be talking about a very different position that we're in now. But ultimately, we came out of the summer window knowing we needed more depth on the wings, knowing we needed more strikers, and knowing we needed more creativity in midfield. We also knew that left-back was a bit of an area which needed discussion, as well as the centre-back positions, with obviously only Sonny Bradley and Nat Phillips as those backup options. Obviously, Nat Phillips, not a bad player by any means, and Jake Rooney, also not a bad player by any means, but also on that return from injury. Sonny Bradley, a player who was never really at the standard of this division, and we never really... we improved bare minimum. And that's what we did in January as well. We improved bare minimum. And I think it falls on David Clowes, but I also think that falls on Paul Warne and Stephen Pearce, the whole squad dynamic, because Yeah, Stephen Pearce deals with negotiations, but David Clowes sets the budgets for those negotiations, and Paul Warne had final say on transfers. We are led to believe, based on comments Paul Warne made in his own press conferences. Now, the problem is we had players who quite clearly didn't want to join Derby County. We had a CEO who didn't want to spend a £1.5 million fee on a player like Louis Barry, who had never played in the Championship, but was more than happy to go and spend £1.5 million on Zetterstrom, who hadn't played in the Championship, £800,000 on Lars Jørgen Salveson, who again didn't play in the Championship, and £4.5 million on Sondre Langas, who again hadn't played in the Championship. So it's a very, very difficult circumstance we find ourselves in, and I personally feel massively for that of John Eustace. I think he's been put in a real difficult situation. I don't believe he really knew the proposition that he was coming into, and obviously you look at the injuries we've got right now. I think if we just pull up the squad depth, you've got Curtis Nelson's out, Joe Ward's out, Matt Clark looks like he's going to be out, Wilson's out, Phillips is out. You then go into midfield, you're missing Corey Blackett-Taylor's out, David Ozo's out. You then go into the front three. Washington isn't registered, is training but not registered. Dejan Brown's out. So we're in a very, very difficult circumstance, and I don't really know what more John Eustace can do. I think it's a very difficult situation for John Eustace, which is one of the reasons why I didn't put him on this list, because I don't think you can really put much blame on a man who's been in the job 10 days. And I do think ultimately we are probably sort of, as fans now, reside into that relegation, and this is where you have to this is where the blame game is going to start, really. And I think it started about a month ago when Derby County really started to really fall within the cracks of that relegation battle with, 7 defeats on the trot before we went to Norwich, 8 defeats in all competitions. And a lot of people are going to say, well, that's on Paul Warne, but ultimately that falls on the owner. It falls on the CEO. And this is why I've said for a while we need a technical director, we need a sporting director, because then you take that decision out of the hands of a CEO and a David Clowes, an owner, who doesn't really know what they're doing in a football capacity. And that's the problem we find ourselves in right now, in that Derby County don't have a squad good enough to compete. Our depth is shot from pillar to post, with obviously the injuries we're suffering and things like that. And John Eustace, really, it's a case of youth or go home, because there's loads of free agent options available, and given the fact that Matt Clark pulled up yesterday, David Ozo's injury, I think we're probably unlikely to see them again this season. I'm hoping that Matt Clark's is a minor and he'll be back after Middlesbrough, but I think it's very unlikely we see either of those. So we're going to have to dip into the market or our youth academy for a centre-back and a midfielder, because Nat Phillips isn't back and ready yet, and that's a problem, because who are you looking at putting in at centre-half then? Jake Rooney, Craig Forsyth, that's pretty much your options. And we can't really, I don't really understand what formation we played yesterday against Millwall. I think in possession it looked like a 4-2-3-1, but Caden Jackson never got high enough up the pitch. I think out of possession it looked like a 3-5-2, but I can't, other than that, that's about all I can give you. And it's really hard. It is really hard talking about the situation we're in right now, and the problem that we continue to have is the lack of quality within the squad, the lack of players who are capable of performing at this level, the lack of technical ability within the squad, the lack of confidence, the lack of end product. And a lot of that falls on Paul Warne, but ultimately I think it then falls on those above him in Stephen Pearce and David Clowes not making that decision to remove Paul Warne earlier, because at some point you have to make a decision. You have to go, well, this isn't working. The players look devoid of confidence. The players look devoid of ideas. And what can we do to fix that problem? And some would say, well, you get rid of some of the bad players and you bring in better players, which ultimately I thought that was the plan in January. You remove the likes of James Collins, you get rid of Joe Ward, you get rid of Tom Barkhuizen, you get rid of Connor Washington, you get rid of the players that aren't playing. You let a Dejan Brown go out on loan, you let Jake Rooney go out on loan, you let Sonny Bradley go, and you bring in players who are much better than they are. And we had the opportunity to do that, especially within the last 10 days of the window. Once we knew that Erin Cashing to Brighton was a real possibility, Derby County, in my opinion, should have gone and bought in 5, 6, 7 players for £1 million. We had the money. The money was there. Like, I don't want anybody to tell me that the budget wasn't there, because yes, a lot of people are going to say, but what was spent on wages? And yes, that's a good conversation. But ultimately, you can't just do the bare minimum and expect the team to compete. And that's what David Clowes has done. And that is where sort of my frustrations go towards, because David Clowes is given godlike status, in my opinion, for obviously taking us over in that administration period and running us to a promotion. But ultimately, I don't think he ever gets the criticism that is deserved of the circumstance we find ourselves in now. And in my opinion, that does fall solely, in my opinion, on the hands of David Clowes, because as owner and runner of the football club, yes, he doesn't do the day-to-day operations, but he funds everything. He essentially has final say on everything. Like, if Stephen Pearce wants to do something, he probably has to run it by David Clowes. And realistically, we're never going to get the answers to any of these questions, because Stephen Pearce won't give any interview externally to Rams TV, because Rams TV, it's controlled, it's concise, it's prepared. He'll know all the questions before we go in. And in a way, I feel for Owen Bradley, because he's probably got a lot of stick over the course of the last week or so from that interview with Stephen Pearce. But ultimately, I don't really believe he deserves it. It's not his fault. He's employed by the club. He has to stick to certain policies so that he's able to continue doing the job he's doing. And I don't think we'll ever see a Rams TV interview that really gives a full picture of what we need to hear. It'll be more a case of what they're willing to discuss and the image they're trying to put out. So if you have not done so already, hit that subscribe button down below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As we come to the end of this video, the poll is sitting on 168 votes with 10 hours left. David Clowes is sitting on 19%, Stephen Pearce on 44%, and Paul Warne on 36.9%. So let me know your thoughts. Go and put your votes in. Let me know your thoughts over on Twitter, and I'll catch you in my next video.